Okay, so good morning and welcome everybody to this edition of INTEREST. This is New York Tech's ETIC Remote Engagement Sessions in Technology. This program is designed to kind of introduce you to technologies that are out in the field that are being used, and there is a career path to, but you might not be directly exposed to them as their proprietary technologies from different companies. So this program is designed to kind of work with you and introduce you to these different technologies that you might see out there as you start looking for jobs in the field. Today's session is creating and managing databases using Microsoft SQL Server. As you know, SQL is structured query language, and SQL Server is a product by Microsoft. And it's one of the leading, if not the leading, database management system, DBMS, in the world. That you can imagine, we kind of use things like MySQL, which is open source, and other types of databases. But you know, the #1 database system in the world is where a lot of the hiring is going to happen. So we wanted to introduce you to that to basically make sure you knew that it was out there, what the components of it was, and how to kind of get started. So I am Dr. Nizik. I'm your host today, and I'm the director of something called the ETIC, the Entrepreneurship and Technology Innovation Center. It's located in room 107 of Harry Shore Hall at the Old Westbury campus. If you're not familiar with the ETIC, you can visit us at nyit.edu/ETIC. And you can, I think that's actually a typo there. That should be a /ETIC. And you can just read up on some of the things that we're doing at the center. We're basically a prototyping center for new products and new innovations, but we're really a New York State recognized business incubator as well. So if you are a student with a company, or you have some interest in business or turning your idea into a product, that's kind of what we're there for as well. And you can see, on the website some of the things we're doing, but also we have our Ursula Robotics project there that you can participate in. We have all kinds of other projects going on that if you want to get your hands dirty, it's a great place to go in and get involved, right? So you can take a look at some of the programs we have going on at the ETIC. This, of course, is one of them, and that's a better address for you to use, nyit.edu/ETIC. The way these work, as far as the interest programs go, is we're bringing up a new technology each week that you may not be aware of. So the objectives for these programs are to kind of create awareness of the existing technologies so that you know that they're out there, and you know that they're being used, and you know that people are hiring for them. To demonstrate the career pathways in those technologies, right? To understand where you can go with these knowledge of these technologies. Demonstrate the components of those technologies, right? Just show you what it actually looks like and what people are expecting you to do. Demonstrate the functionality of those technologies as far as showing you different pieces of it, as far as how it works and what's similar to what you know already as far as the framework goes, and how they do it differently in their proprietary technology, just so you get a clear understanding of what it looks like, how it works, what it's supposed to do, in a very short period, of course, that we're doing this, but just give you a very high level overview of these things. And then provide you directions on how to get started, right? Where to download things, where to get access to it. Is it free? Does it cost anything? All kinds of things that you'd want to know to kind of say, what's my next steps? I like it, I saw it, I get it, but how do I get started, right? That's the concept. All right, so we're going to do that today for you with Microsoft SQL Server, and we're going to talk a little bit now about that product. You've heard, you've probably heard the name Microsoft, I would assume. And, SQL Server, I know you heard SQL, it's a structured query language, and you've probably heard, a number of different uses of that. You may have even used it already. But let's talk about data, just data in general, as far as why data is an industry and why data is the new oil, right? So we say data is the new oil because if you think about oil, right, when it was first discovered, it wasn't really that useful, and then we started building things around that oil, and then the oil was priceless, right? Data is the same way. For the longest time, we collected data, and it was almost a problem. It was almost like, what are we doing with all this data? Why do we have so much? Let's streamline it. Let's not use as much data. And eventually we started realizing, wow, we could learn a lot from the data if we just knew how to compile it, just knew how to aggregate it, and just knew how to process it in a manner that would help us to solve current problems that we kind of handle every day. So, as soon as business leaders started to realize that, wow, we make the same decision each year, but we make it based on some guessing, some kind of educated guess techniques. If we had the ability to really predict and use like a regression analysis technique to say, figure out what's happened in the past with all these other parameters affecting it, and what can we predict for the future, all of a sudden we started making really, really, really accurate decisions, which save us money, it increases our profit, it streamlines our organizations. We don't wind up hiring people we don't need to hire. We wind up, benefiting in all kinds of ways by using data to predict what's going to happen in the future and then making decisions off of that. The jobs that we see in data today, are database designers that store the structures, the actual create the structures for the data to be stored in, but they create it in a way so that we can easily manipulate that data later on in order to make decisions. We call that data mining, we call it data warehousing, we call that artificial intelligence or machine learning. All these terms that you see around there, we're going to kind of try to introduce to you today how some of these products kind of allow you to do that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some career opportunities, some background as far as the database history and background. Definitely the SQL Studio, management studio, which allows you to interact in a visual manner with multiple SQL databases and multiple portions of data. We're going to talk about SQL, structured query language, the standard database language of all databases. We're going to talk about DML, data manipulation language, which allows us to alter databases and make, alter the data inside of databases. But we also want to talk about DML, data manipulation language, DDL, data definition language, which allows us to change the structure of databases, right? So these are coding languages and portions of SQL that allow us to really do massive amounts of data analysis very quickly and very easily. The point of a session like this is not to make you an expert in it, but to let you know that this is where the jobs are. If you can show that you understand the bigger picture and that you actually have a really good working knowledge and hands-on experience and demonstrative abilities in these technologies to access data, to manipulate data, to create reports, to join tables together and figure out what's happening in the future, it's a really good, lucrative career for you and very secure. Okay, let's talk about scripting. We'll talk about creating series of SQL commands that run as a script. We'll talk about managing databases, backing up and restore, database security, making sure people only have access to what they need, right? Need to know basis. And we'll talk about the SQL Server agent, which actually runs as an automated management tool so that the SQL Server abilities, the SQL Server tasks that it runs can be automated so that you as a manager could say, yeah, I want to wake up at 8 o'clock, have my coffee at 9 o'clock. I want the reports on my desk that show me what's happening with my database, right? And that's what the agent allows you to do. So let's get going. Let's talk about a career in SQL Server in this case. So you'll see that we did a quick query just on Microsoft SQL Server for Indeed. We see about 13,000 jobs open, all kinds of jobs. One of the most interesting that I thought that I used as an example here was a business intelligence developer. It sounds real high tech, and it is high tech. All this is high tech, but when we say a BI developer, it's really automating and generating reports on a regular basis. It's really what it is. If you know SQL and you know SQL Server agent and you know how to program and automate things inside of SQL Server to quickly and very, very on a regular basis generate data. Sometimes you're exporting data out to another table. Sometimes you're generating it out into a printed report. But the ability to manage that and uniquely program that is really what people are looking for in these BI developers, business intelligence developers. And you can see from the salary, it's very, very lucrative. You see something called senior in there. What I tell all my students is that when you're talking about information technology, senior is really 3 to 5 years. If you're talking about a 10 or 25 year person, if that's in your mind, it's not really that way. That's executive level leadership and things like that. But when we talk about actual jobs like this, Senior level is, not as long as you would think. And if you get a year or two under your belt at school and you go and work for a couple of years, you'll be in that range, and you'll be definitely able to qualify for some of these upper positions, right? Basically, we want to see in industry, we want to see that you can do the job, not just talk about it, not just show us on a resume, not even show us an old project. Actually sit down and do it, right? And that's really what these programs, the interest programs, are about, is to get you going to say, how do I get there? How do I get to that point where I can sit down and do it? Okay. So we'll talk about the top databases that are out there right now. And of course, we have Amazon Web Services, or Aurora. And these are cloud-based web-based services, but they're not, terribly different from anything that we're going to talk about in SQL Server. The next up is, you see, SQL Server, then Oracle, then Postgres SQL. But all these SQL databases and all of these DBMS systems, database management systems, these systems are in use in massive scale, okay? Every small application uses a SQL database of some sort or another. Every massive enterprise level application with 10,000 users at a time uses some sort of a SQL database. So, the concept of learning, right, being exposed to database management systems and then focusing on one of the leaders is a very, very healthy career, focused kind of decision to make. Today, we're just picking out one of the leaders as SQL Server, and providing you that ability to know what it does, know what's out there, and understand kind of how it works.
One more point to the senior label on the job description. My company right now, we put out senior sales engineer positions, and they said they were willing to hire junior, but it's easier to get pre-approval for a senior position and then hire, a really good junior. So, I'm just saying that so people aren't discouraged at applying for those kind of positions. If you're good at what you do, they'll still hire you. They just needed to get it approved through HR first. So
yeah,
you should always apply. And
always apply. Yeah. I mean, I've done so much hiring in my career, and we would always put out like a dream, like what would be the perfect person who walks in the door. We rarely were able to hire them because we asked for so much. So don't ever, we would hire somebody, of course, but don't ever feel like, this has one little thing in it that I don't do, so I won't apply. Always go for it, because they want to see that you can walk the walk and talk the talk, and they want to see that you can perform. But if you have to learn something and you can't do it now, as long as you've demonstrated that you could learn something in the past, that's a lot of times what they're looking for. So thank you, Ken, for adding on to that, and I think it's a good practical example for everybody to understand. Wow, I'm closer than I think. That's my goal, is to make sure that you realize when you see these jobs, if you get a lot of this hands-on activity going now, and you apply it to some projects that we make available for you at New York Tech that you can work on, you might actually have 1 or 2 years towards your senior, type goal, which will shrink you down from 4 years of experience to 2 in the field. So thank you, Ken. We'll kind of just get back into this area too. But he's got a great point for everybody to don't be afraid to apply to these things. All right, so let's talk about some basic tenets of information and data. We talk about data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So when we talk about data, we see this kind of raw code up here. If we saw that out in the field, even if it was unencrypted, we'd still have a hard time figuring out what it was. If we apply a mask to it, that takes data and makes it information for us, that we can kind of understand that it means something, has a semantic meaning to it. You basically have these parentheses and dash. We now know it's a phone number. Then knowledge comes when we know whose phone number that is, and wisdom comes when we say, do we know Joe? Should we call him? Why would we call him? Is it going to be a good thing to call him or not call him? So all these different tenets of information and databases we want to keep in mind as we go through these processes. Don't let the concept of database and DBMS and SQL and all those things that we're going to talk about today kind of mystify you. Just keep a working concept. We're talking about data. We're talking about columns and rows of data, very similar to a spreadsheet format, but essentially like the database management system is just a really super powerful, robust way of managing these columns and rows, right? and we get ways to link them together and all that stuff. But just let's not get too crazy as far as what we're really talking about here. We're still talking about raw data that is stored in binary format, and we want to, be able to manage and manipulate that data so it's meaningful to us, so we can make educated decisions, so we can do really powerful things for our organization at the most efficient way possible. All right. This has been around for quite a while. I mean, very long time. We started with flat file databases, which had extreme limitations in size and in sharing. And whenever we would try to share databases with a lot of people, they would cause, massive amounts of data damage. We would call it fragmentation. You have to constantly repair thase. And these are things like DBase, Paradox, FoxPro Access. Very powerful. At the time, they were groundbreaking, and they were game changing. But they had severe limitations to massively rolling them out. They certainly weren't web-based because there wasn't even a web at the time. And then we went to something called SQL in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, structured query language. And with SQL, we were able to now have a standard database language that all vendors could speak. So Oracle and Microsoft and MySQL and any other database access or whatever that database management systems they had out there at the time, no matter what they spoke internally to make their own functions really robust, they always spoke SQL, which means that any other application, programming languages included, could speak to them and get data access out of them. That was a game changer, right? But the ability to really share these flat file databases, even if they use SQL, was very, very limited to what we could do. We needed a traffic cop. We needed basically somebody to say, hey, you're asking for this data. I'm going to give it to you, but I'm going to keep everybody else out until I give it to you. And I'm only going to give you what you want. I'm not going to give you the whole database, which is what was happening in flat file databases. We're going to kind of be a traffic cop and give everybody what they need to get. And RDMS, Relational Database Management Systems, that was the next game changer. The big platform change was RDMS. Once we went into database management systems, these were server-based, powerful management systems with all the data that only gave applications what they needed at the time. They weren't sending over entire tables and having the workstation sort through them. They were sorting through them first and then giving the applications and the users and the workstations only what they needed. It saved on bandwidth, it saved on processing, it saved on memory. You could have a weak machine attach a powerful server, and it was beautiful. It was the greatest solution ever, and it still is to this day. But the more data you poured into these database management systems, they started to fail. There was just too much data. So when you wanted to mine through terabytes of data and figure out what was going to happen next based on regression analysis, they failed, right? They're great for transaction processing and for storing large amounts of data and manipulating them. But when it gets too big, they would start to fail. So we had to come up with a NoSQL, which is a new database format, a more recent database format. You'll see like Cassandra, HBase, Mongo, CouchDB, things like that. And these files were designed to basically search incredibly fast, and they weren't really doing relationships the same way that a relational database system would work, which is what was breaking down when we had large amounts of data. And then we had to get even faster, where we had to actually have we couldn't have one processor or even two processors on the system running, full force to do these analytical things we wanted to do with data. So we had to distribute that work over multiple workstations and servers. And that was where Hadoop, came in with file distribution, process distribution. So HDFS was the first distributed system for processing data on multiple machines. You would have tons and tons of terabytes of data that you would put in some sort of a command to, and it would just distribute it over hundreds of processors and bring back a result. So you have this ability now to really do some massive amounts of processing. And then we had cloud database. We don't want to separate too much from like a relational database management system, because really what it is, in a very short, very simple concept, is it's all these things, NoSQL databases, RDMS data systems in the cloud, right? They're being hosted so that all of our data and our applications are all in the cloud. What it really does for us is that instead of having everything hosted locally, where we are processing everything on our own machines and we have to buy those machines and maintain those machines and upgrade those machines, we're really just doing it in the cloud. That means that we can buy and rent, rent, almost timeshare, massively powerful machines that we could never afford. That's what the cloud does for us. We could pay monthly very small amounts of money, but do this massive amount of processing on the cloud databases. So the database piece isn't that different. It's just that it's cloud-based, which means that we don't have to buy all the equipment and all the servers and the people to manage it. We can just pay a monthly fee and have it running for us in perfect shape all the time, which is really kind of amazing. Right? So that's kind of where we are now. So I wanted to just, kind of add one more piece of this. One thing you don't see in here, and it's the next slide, which is why I went back for a second. You don't see blockchain. And blockchain is really unique, right? When we talk about Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin runs on blockchain. So does Ethereum. Ethereum is its own blockchain, technology. Blockchain is a public ledger that uses one-way hashing with a very large key, a 256-bit key, and it's SHA, secure hash algorithm 256, and it encrypts all of this data in this chain where one block knows what's in the other block, and they relate to each other, they point to each other, but it's so secure and it's so immutable, meaning it can't be changed because it will essentially fix itself, and it's public, it's running on all these different nodes, that it becomes this database technology that companies are looking to adapt in certain areas of their business because they want to make some of their data public and they don't want to worry about it getting hacked, right? Even your web server could get hacked, it could damage the data. So there's a concern, they got to do firewalls, got to do demilitarized zone. But with a blockchain, you could publish your data and just put it out there and it wouldn't get changed. So companies are looking at this because they don't have to spend the cost on securing the data anymore if they adopt a blockchain technology. But it's not your transactional technology. It's a technology that you take your transactional database and you turn it into a blockchain database, and then you put the blockchain database out there for people to interact. So I wanted to throw it in there, but it's really outside of the loop of really what we're talking about specifically. But just so you're aware, we're taking regular raw data that we would normally store in a database, but with blockchain where we're using hash algorithms to basically secure that data so it's immutable. We can't decrypt it. We can't read it. If we try to change one thing, the other blocks repair the damaged block. So it's a really secure data solution for public use. So that gives you a kind of a viewpoint of everything that we have data-wise kind of in today's world that you're working in. But essentially, when we talk about databases versus RDMS systems, the tables that we would normally work with in a normal kind of flat file database where we store data in these we have attributes of data, we have the field names and types and sizes. Once we go into a relational database management system, each one of those tables links to each other. So instead of trying to have one massive, ugly, huge table with names and orders and order details and product ID and vendor IDs and all that stuff in one mess, which is what we used to have in things like, COBOL and Fortran, and we used to try to find ways to structure the data efficiently. Now we basically say, all right, well, let's just keep all of our product data in one clean table. But that product data is going to relational, it's going to relate to order products by a primary key and a foreign key. We have a primary key which identifies each product as a unique product, and we have a foreign key which actually identifies a one-to-many relationship. So all these terms you may have heard in the past, when we link all these tables together, these tables create our relational database, and we're not reproducing any data. We only have one product. But that one product might be included in 62 orders. We only have one customer, but that customer might have 62 orders, right? So you have these tables that hold unique data, but when we want to show how many orders for each customer between two dates, we link them together because there's a relation between them. We link the two tables together, and we only display in our display one table or another, right? One field from one table and three fields from another table and so forth. And those are called queries. Okay, so basically that's what we work with when we work with relational database systems. And again, let's remember we're talking about data, but when we work inside of, today we're going to be working with Management Studio, SQL Management Studio. It's Microsoft's product for managing databases. We can work with 20 different databases in one window, in one program from all over the world. We can work with 20 different databases from different organizations, and we can scroll through the data and we can create queries between them and all kinds of stuff, all from one program. It's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly useful for executive leaders to say, hey, Mary, Bob, Joe, Susie, I need you to get this report to me by 12 because I've got a meeting at 1 and I need to know this information. If you can do that, you've got a great career in data analytics and SQL management. Okay, so one thing I wanted to go over with you before we get started on the demo is that whenever you're dealing with any kind of an organization or a network, you're talking about a database server. So where is our SQL Server located? Where's our database server? I wanted to clear that up for you, and I'll show you this real time in the demo. But I wanted to clear that up for you so you understood what they were talking about. Whenever you have a network and you actually have like your domain name servers here and your file servers, you have your firewall, your database servers, there's two things that involve them. There's a physical server, like a Dell server, an HP server, or something like that runs it. But the SQL Server service that runs on there, the software that runs on that physical server, that's also called a server. So the database server could be running on a physical Dell server. So I always wanted to clarify, I always like to clarify that difference between the server terms that we use. So we have a physical server that things run on, just a Windows server. It could run 20 other applications, but it also runs the SQL Server. So when we talk about the SQL Server, just keep in mind, we're talking about the service that's running. Now, one Dell server could run 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 SQL servers. They're called instances. So there's an instance of a SQL server that runs on each different physical server, right? And you could have multiple SQL servers running on the same physical server, right? So just to clear that up as far as how that works. Oracle has their version and Microsoft has their version and MySQL has their version, but essentially they all run the same way where the physical server is running the SQL Server version of that. So what I wanted to do, in these sessions is introduce you to all these different things that you may not have seen before, may not even know existed. And the things we're going to cover today are Management Studio and how to manage these things, structured query language, what the language looks like, and how to manipulate databases using that language. There's 2 versions of SQL. There's 2 parts of SQL, I should say: data manipulation language and data definition language. One of those manipulates data and changes data, and one of those actually designs data. It actually changes the actual structure of the table through code, okay? And we're going to talk about scripts, running multiple SQL scripts, SQL commands in one script, and then backing up and restoring, database security, and SQL Server Agent, which is a tool to automate all the things that you need to do for that. So one of the first things I wanted to make sure you're aware of is that, and again, to demystify things a little bit, right? When we talk about SQL Server, Microsoft has a really cool approach to this, right? Their approach is basically, look, all of our products, we want to sell our products, but the people that are going to pay the most money for our products are organizations, businesses that see the real value in this, and they're going to buy them for like 10, 20, 30 people working together, right? Teams of programmers, right, is part of agile programming. We use agile development systems when we develop software. Agile is communicating with the customer, working in teams, using tools, right, sharing data. You won't build a quality product really rapidly today without using agile development. DevOps is the new one, but basically, same concepts apply in both. So having tools that allow programmers to share code and check out code and edit code and manage code and manage those changes is really powerful. So they figure if a developer is going to learn a piece of software and then move into an organization that uses that software, what a great way to do that. So let's give all of our software away for free for the developers. And then once they join a team, that team will have to purchase our license, right? And it seems crazy, but it's not. It's, all of their developer versions are free so that you can learn them and even build on them. You can even build some small applications if you are a one-person show. But once you join a larger team, that team has to pay the license for you so that you can be part of the team, right? So, clearly it's working. They're a great company. But on the same note, what it means for us is that SQL Server, as you wind up building SQL Server applications, if you download the SQL Server Express version, that's free. You can load it on your laptop, okay? If you want to attach to the SQL Server Express version that you've created and you want to use it with SQL Server Management Studio, okay, that's free. What we're going to use today is all free. Can you manage terabytes of data for an enterprise system? No, you can't, but not that you wouldn't know how to or wouldn't have the tools to do it. It's just that Microsoft makes certain limitations. They have certain stops in there that'll stop you from using it in these massive organizations for free. But you, as a developer and as a user, can learn everything you need to learn real time in an organization, in an enterprise organization, on these free versions, and you won't see any difference at all. When you manipulate terabytes of data on when you work for IBM and you're working on their systems, or you work for some other company working on their systems, all the tools and techniques you learn on these free versions are the same things you're going to be learning on those versions. So the first thing we want to just make sure is that you are aware that you can download SQL Server Express for free, and you can download SQL Server Management Studio for free. Okay, those are the two things you'll see in the demo today that are going to allow you to kind of learn the technologies, understand what the components are of them, understand kind of how they work. All right, so now we're going to get into the demo, and we're going to try to cover as much as we can from that list that we just talked about. Okay, so what you're seeing in front of you is it's Microsoft SQL Server, but you don't really see the server. You see the data that the server is managing and hosting. What you wind up seeing is Management Studio. Management Studio is the tool that we use to look at database servers. So database servers are the things that are running on different systems. To give you an idea of how that works, if I went into the services area of my my training machine here, and I brought up SQL Server, you'll see a lot of services running that are SQL Server, right, based products. And each one of these does a different thing for Microsoft SQL Server, so that each of the things that we're going to do today are able to be managed. You'll see something called Agent, you'll see something called SQL Server, and these are programs that are running. These programs run on startup. There's nothing else you have to do to get them to run. Everything that we do through Microsoft's Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio, is just software-based. It's another piece of software that attaches to these instances, okay? So SQL Server is a software express that runs, but you won't be able to really interact with it until you have Management Studio, which will attach to it and allow you to give you all the tools to interact with it, okay? So there's a difference between Management Studio, what you're using today, and SQL Server, which can run and host databases and do everything it does, but you don't necessarily have to have SQL Server Management Studio on it to host that data. Anytime that you have your Management Studio open, you have your Object Explorer, which will give you every database that you have access to, and it'll give you all the different components of that database. So anything to do with security inside the SQL Server itself, anything to do with databases and the database specifics. So remember, when it comes to security, databases are a unique piece of a whole network. So when you have a database, that database is basically protected by the firewall and the systems and the operating system and all that. But it's also, in security, we talk about layered security. There's also its own security to every single table. So you can lock down a table so that nobody can edit data in there. Someone can read data, but they can't edit it at the table. They can get access to the firewall, to the network, to the server. But when it comes to the database server, there's an extra layer of security on there, excuse me. Okay, so let's start with a table. And inside each table, you'll have a specific series of attributes that make up that table, right? And we call them fields. And in this case, for the ETIC names demo table that we created for this session, we have columns, which are really fields, and they're called name ID and first name and last name and middle name. And that means that when we store data in this table as rows, the rows are collected so that we can limit the type of data we collect. So in this case, we're looking for numeric data in the name ID. We're also looking for a variable character, not more than 50 characters in the first name column, in the state column, and so forth. Now, state is a little silly because we're collecting 50 characters. We'd only be collecting 2. So we can talk about that when we talk about DDL to say how do we change that in that area. So what we want to look at for this introductory session of SQL Server, you now know what SQL Server is, where it lies in the database world. You now know that there's a management studio to manage it. You know there's a free download to install it. And now we want to see what happens with the data itself, right? What we can do is use queries. And whenever we build a new query, that new query kind of comes up as a text document that we can highlight. Once we kind of highlight one version of this, okay, we can execute just that one comment, just that one command. So if I said, look, if I wanted to just use the ETIC demo database, we have to use it first and we want to execute it. That's okay. It now knows we're going to use it. But if I wanted to select all three at the same time, so if I wanted to select all the fields from ETIC names at the same time, it'll use the ETIC demo and it'll also select all the names. So you can select multiple lines in this browser as you do it. So let's take a look at this for a second. What just happened? All I did was I said select star from ETIC names, and I got a listing of every different name in that table. Everything, every column, everything. That's what star does. That's great and it's cool, but sometimes that's going to be overwhelming. If I have 250 fields in a table and I have 6 million records, that's going to be crazy to try to figure out. So what we can do is we can say, all right, let's just select 2 of those names, okay? And then we can get a result back from there, okay? If we want to say, all right, let's select 2 of those names, but only, right, only where the name ID is equal to 3, okay? Now, if I just select this particular statement, okay, now I'm getting one piece of data. Now we start to see, wow, okay, hold on a second. If I'm dealing with a company with all kinds of valuable corporate data, right? Orders and sales and more cost of marketing campaigns and the returns on what they did, right? If somebody wants to say, how much do we spend on marketing? How much do we actually earn from it? How much does one customer buy in a year? How much do groups of customers buy in a year? Are those customers related? Are they part of a social networking group, right? These are all questions that can be asked to you that the leaders of an organization might say, okay, we need to make some decisions here on where to spend money over the next year. We want to apply it to the most, the most probable ways that we can increase our bottom line. They're going to come to you and say, use the data to find out, right, that information. Okay, so we have the ability with data manipulation language, DML, to search data and give us results back on really any table in our database. If we wind up using DML as well, we can alter the data. Okay, so if we wanted to say, you know what, let's take a look at everything we have, right? This is everything we have in this table, and the address, in this case, this is an example. The address, let's just say state. We don't like New York as we want to say the name New York. All right, well, what we can do is we can update that table. Again, we can change data in DML too. So we can change data and we can set, well, let me just copy this so we have this as an example here. And this will give you a good idea of how flexible it is, right? So we're going to update ETIC names. We're going to set state equal to New York, right? The spelling. Notice we have to use single quotes when we do this. SQL uses single quotes to identify text. And we're going to say where. We're not going to do name ID. We're going to say where the field state, right, currently equals New York. So we're going to replace, and I have you see it underlines here, so it does a little bit of debugging and a little spell check there. But the reason it wasn't saying it was misspelled, it was saying that it doesn't recognize the value, which is very helpful. But what's going to happen here is that when I change this, it's going to find every state with New York and change it to the word New York, right? All at once. Okay, so now it says 7 rows affected. Now if I come back up here and I select this, everything's New York. Okay, now here's the scary part. When you're working as a database administrator, which is what role I'm in now, what role I'm telling you career-wise is a great role, what you just did, it's not going to prompt you for, are you sure you want to do this? Is this okay for you? It's not a piece of software that was written. It's an administrative role. So you've just changed 7 records that are irreversible. We have things called rollbacks that are rollback transactions, but they're not very common, to use because they're only good for the rollback that you just did. You want to be aware that when you make these changes, there's an extreme tolerance check, we'll call it, to make sure that what you're doing is going to be good for the database, right? Is what you want to do. I've seen things where it's like, oh, we need to run a report, just a report, and alterations have been made so that the report comes out right, but now you've altered all the data, in the database, which affects integrity. We always look at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and especially in a security role. And integrity has just been damaged because of a user error, right? So it's extremely sensitive and extremely important for you to consider every change that you make as you make it. Okay, so so that was a data manipulation language in its basics. We have the common commands, just to kind of put them up here, are select, insert, delete, and update. With those 4 commands, see if I did this right. With those 4 commands, you're able to delete data from the table, which is even scarier than what I just did with updating it. You can insert new records into the table, and you can select data from the table. But those 4 commands essentially are DML, and they allow you to just do amazing things with data that can help people to understand their data better. Okay, I'll give you one quick one. See if I can do this here. Insert into ETIC names. Let's see if I can get through this for you. We're going to put in first name, and we're going to put in last name. It's just 2 columns, and then we're going to put in values, and then we're going to put in. Let's put in my name. My name, Michael, and then we're going to say since I'm not in there already, we should be able to see this as a value. So now if I say this and I put this in there and I execute it, I get 1 row affected. Good, there's no typos, there's no errors, but I just added something to my database. All right. Now, if I select from my ETIC names, okay, you'll see that there's a Michael Nizick in there now, but there's no other associated information. But now I could use update, where record number equals 8, update city equals this and state equals that, right? We could use it. So DML, data manipulation language, allows you to alter data inside of a table based on what your organizational needs are at that time. So as a database administrator, which is one of the titles we talk about, junior DBA, it's called junior DBA. These are the things you would do. It's not just opening it up and browsing because you want to. You're going to get requests. I need this data. I need a report. We do it here. I mean, we do it here at New York Tech. I need all students that graduated between these 2 dates with this degree, took these courses and whatever. They're going into our DBAs and they're processing them and they're giving us the reports back out. They're not, I don't want to say they were pretty, but essentially they're raw. They're just data. But that data was acquired by people that are handling a request and doing the queries to get that data out. And it would be impossible. It would be impossible for me to get the data if I didn't have the administrators there, because they know the structures, they know the details, they know the relationships, and they know what to get out because it's their job to know the system. That's the job we're talking about, similar, in nature. But they work with tools like this MySQL has the Workbench, right? And Oracle has Workbench. So Visual Studio, SQL Server Management Studio, and Workbench are the 2 comparable programs to visually attach to databases that are storing data, right? And those are the tools you'll work with to do that. Let's take a look. This is all DML. Okay, let's take a look. If I wanted to take, the ETIC names table, if I right-click on it and I go to design, I can design a table and say, you know what? We're not capturing telephone number in here or a cell number, right? So we want to put in cell number, the name cell number, and we want to put in nvarchar. Why would we put in nvarchar? Because variable character, because we different formats might be required, right? We might have a web form that's collecting cell phone with parentheses, another web form that's connected with dots, a European telephone number, sometimes they have the dots between them, right? So you have to have a variable character in there. But if I was calculating salary, right, I would definitely want to do numeric. And if you notice down here, all the different pieces of each one of these fields, like we're on the numeric field right now for salary, I can say it's numeric. I could put a default value in there. I could put in a number to start with. So every time you add a new record, it's going to default those values in there. Every time I want to scale it, meaning I want to put precision is the number of decimal points, scale it. I want to have it scale out, for, a certain amount of numbers. All these different things that you can have for every different type of field. It's incredibly powerful. What does it really mean to you? What it means is that programmers are doing less and less programming on the front end. They're doing more and more on the back end. So when you see an ad for a full stack developer, they're looking for developers that can build the database, but build the front end as well, right? If I can build a web, which by the way, our other interest sessions have C# and Visual Studio for developing applications. We attach those applications to a SQL Server backend. The reason is that all the things that we can do on the SQL Server now, we don't have to write that code on the front end. So the workstation processes it faster and doesn't have to be as powerful. It's the coding that we would normally in the old days have to do on the workstation. The transmission time from the workstation to the server used to be an issue. I'd have to lock the database, but if it took time for the message to get there and somebody else got there in the meantime, that database was locked, my system would crash. So now the server's doing all the locking, the server's doing all the distribution, the server's doing all the rule-based stuff, right? I could put constraints on each one of these fields so that if we didn't want people to calculate salary over a certain amount, under a certain amount, whatever, we don't have to code that in the application anymore. We can code that on the SQL database. So your career paths in database management, specifically SQL Server management, are so varied because once you know the system, there's a job for building constraints for programmers to attach to. There's a job for managing the database. There's a job for just pulling out reports, right? So there's all these things in learning one technology one time, learning all the aspects of it. There's all these different pathways that you can take. All right. So so what we would do is when we save these pieces, now what happens is when we select star from ETIC names now we're getting more data. Now we're getting cell number and salary data as well, right? So the ability to edit these things and then select from them is really a powerful piece. Now, the reason I was adding the fields in there is because I wanted to show you DDL, and the easiest way to do that is if we click on this table as an example, and we say script table as, and we want to, let's just say we want to create it to the clipboard, right? What we can do is if I went to a new query and I pasted what I just did, just pointing to the names table and scripting it, I use DDL. I use data definition language, and I said, figure out the names of the fields, the size of the fields, the type of the fields, and just script it out for me in DDL. What you're seeing right now is data definition language. So I'm basically sitting here saying, I'm going to use the ETIC demo table. Go is to activate the actual SQL command to happen. And then we can set the identifier on, we can do the create table command, all the different table names and the table structures. You can, if you want, if you have some sort of a passion for this, you can use DDL to create new tables. Usually we use it when we just need to make alterations table. We have something called alter table. We have alter table, we make an adjustment to a field size or something like that. The reason I say that is this: if I go to tables and I go to new table, what you just saw in DDL, this is a much easier and faster and very, very logical way for me to do this in visual format. If I have to hand type it in, there's more room for errors. So in agile programming, one of the tenets is to use tools. This is why they want you using tools. If you can use tools and it shrinks a 6-hour product into 1 hour and there's less errors, why aren't you using the tools? That would be a visual tool to do this. We use DDL many, many times, all the time, to make small adjustments to be like just alter table, change. We use it to change security parameters. We use it to change logins and permissions. Because many times you're not at a station, you might be on a Linux machine or something like that. It doesn't have Management Studio on it, but you still have access to the command line versions of SQL. Okay, so there's all kinds of reasons that it exists and it's there. And it's very, very important for you to know that everything we just did, you can do in SQL, structured query language, okay? All the things we just did, editing databases, I'll give you a quick example of this one. Let's say we wanted to call this ETIC addresses. In other words, we wanted to create a new table in DDL called ETIC addresses, but the same structure, the exact same format of the other one. Maybe we want to call this, instead of city, we want to call this city state or something like that, right? Right. Now, when we run this, okay, what you'll see is that in the ETICS names database right now, in the ETIC names table under columns, okay, let's see. So under tables now, under the ETIC demo database, we now have a table called ETIC addresses, and that ETIC addresses is set up with the new format. And I didn't visually create this. I didn't go and right click a new table. I just ran the DDL. Get it, right? Data definition language creates and changes the structure of the database. DML, data manipulation language, select, update, insert, and delete, just alters the data inside of it, okay? So we have two different portions of SQL that actually let you really manage databases. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to show you some of the management features of SQL. And what we want to make sure of is that this database, you can imagine, is incredibly important to somebody somewhere, right? Maybe not this one because it's a demo, but you know, right? Picture billions of records of customers' orders, products, things like that. If we go into ETIC demo, into the table itself, if you right click, you'll see tasks. These are all the management tasks that you can do, okay? And one of the things that you can do is you can back up that database. So what you can do with backing up databases is that you can create full or incremental backups of those databases, and you can create them, right, to a certain file, right? You can create them to an actual backup file that can be used. If something were to happen with this database or this server and somebody rebuilt a new server and put a new SQL Server on it, we would have to take that backup file and we would have to restore it. And we would have to restore the database. We would just have to select it from a USB or, you know, a SAN server or something like that, something big enough to store it. Excuse me. And once we restored it, we would then be able to access the data that we just lost, right up until we lost it, right? When things shut down and people were trying to make edits and got errors, we wouldn't have that data, but right up until the last time it got backed up. Okay, so you have this ability to back up entire databases and systems. You also have the ability to run something called SQL Server Agent. And SQL Server Agent, we create these jobs. So SQL Server is always running on the server, but it's only just automating SQL Server processes. So if we were to create a new job or a new schedule, the job itself would be named backup, right? The job itself would be named backup ETIC names. And then we would schedule the backup for that to run 4 times a day or something like that, right? And it would just update. We could do an incremental backup. So as a database administrator, you could learn all these tools really, really, really easily. Well, you could learn them really, really well. Let me put it that way. And then when somebody says, you know what, I'm worried about our data not being backed up enough. Don't worry, I can take care of it. Here's how I'm going to handle it. Here are my tools. Here's my structure. Let me get approval from you for do this, and then you program this to do it. Now, on top of this, what you can do is you can program this to get alerts. So now every time that the system backups successfully, you'll get a text message. You could be at the movies, you could be going around and walking through the park, and then bam, you know, yep, I feel comfortable because my database server backup worked. All right, so SQL Server Agent allows you to manage things in a way that are really, really efficient and kind of put your mind at ease that you are managing your databases properly. Those jobs don't have to be just backups. They can be report generation. You can create a job that emails the CEO that her daily activity report is ready. So you can create all those things that they ask you every day and be like, I'm just going to create a report for this. I'm going to schedule that job to run. And then they're going to be on the notification list. So every morning they get a text, they click on the link, and it's your report waiting for them because you created a job to automate that report. Okay, that's power. That's that knowledge that you have and that ability to do that for somebody to make the right decisions for the organization that you work for, keeping that organization healthy. That's what people want to see. If you have that skill set and you show that type of vim and vigor and want to do that for people, you're going to skyrocket right to the top. Okay, and that's what people are looking for. Right. So these are all the things that are available to you. These are all Microsoft SQL Server specific products. They're free to you as developers, especially as students. You can get them. You can build your own databases. You can practice with them. You can do all kinds of things with them. But keep in mind, what you're doing is geared towards, right, some of those senior level job positions we just talked about earlier today that are waiting. There was, 6,000 jobs open that are looking for people to fill them with adequate knowledge to do that, right? So with that, because we're at our time, I'm going to end the interest session for today.